Some of you might remember this picture. Our family served as missionaries in Russia for a decade throughout the 90s. After studying to become fluent in Russian, we were invited to teach at a Christian university. And we were so privileged, both Doug and I, to be able to train a whole new generation of Russian pastors and missionaries, and they are now spread out throughout the whole world. When we were barely over 30, we were actually voted into mission leadership on our field, becoming field directors for a team of 40 missionaries who were spread across that big country. We were the kind of missionary family that they put in all the magazines and the videos. On furlough, they had us speak across Canada and the United States. We prepared creative multimedia presentations, and we would speak every weekend, sometimes up to 14 venues in one weekend. We had a lot of energy back then. Makes me tired now. We epitomized the strength of our mission on the new mission field of the former Soviet Union. But in 1999, when we went back to Russia for another term of service, our mission guard dog would change all that. Rented houses like the one that you see here, that we had for our mission home and field office, came with metal doors, metal bars, metal walls around them, and a guard dog in the yard. Ours was a German wire-haired pointer named Elsa. Her owner would proudly take her hunting, and he'd put her back into our yard full of ticks from hunting. And in Russia, the ticks are on pheasants, and that was what this hunter would catch. He would open his truck and show us 30 pheasants that Elsa had caught, but she would have ticks all over her. And for the sake of that poor dog and also our children playing in the yard with the dog, Doug would pull off those ticks from her fur. He would at least remove the adult ticks, because the nymphs, the babies, were the size of grains of sand, so you couldn't really even see them. We returned to Canada in 2001 for Doug to get his PhD. By the time he finished and took up international mission leadership, he was working sick. We were traveling all over the world with him sick. He was starting to see lots of different doctors. Within 2 years, his organs started shutting down, and the mission doctor put him on a sick leave, and he's never returned to work since then. That was 2006. There's actually no photo backup for the 10 long, dark years from the time when Doug pulled the ticks off that dog in Russia, through 18 specialists here in Canada, to a final diagnosis of what had become chronic Lyme disease. For 2 of those years, we had no income, and we were fighting to get him on long-term disability with the insurance company. By that time, our boys were breaking bones just far too easily, and we wondered what was up. I had finished a doctorate and anticipated supporting our family. But I too soon fell ill with symptoms similar to Doug's. Pain, terrible fatigue, memory loss, kind of like what Anna was talking about, and also muscle spasms. These are just a few of the 76 symptoms of chronic Lyme disease, which actually mimics ALS, Lou Gehrig's, also Parkinson's, MS, and many other diseases. It took 3 years for me to be diagnosed, and another year to receive the devastating news that our boys, Josh and Zach, also had it. They couldn't believe their blood work. The boys thought, we feel pretty good. I mean, they had few symptoms at that time. But after a couple of years, the boys started admitting, at least to us, that they were getting more symptoms. As a family, we had journeyed from strength to weakness. We lost not only our health, but our careers, our life in ministry that we felt called to since we were teenagers. We kind of fell off the missionary map. Remember the maps they used to have with the pins showing where the missionaries were? Our pin just kind of popped off that map. And we lost all our colleagues, and who were also our closest friends. It was very difficult. We were just of no further use to the mission, so we had no further involvement with it. As you can imagine, Doug and I took turns being suicidal during that time. He was largely bedridden for several years, and I remember sitting in church, worried that he might take his life before we returned to him. I cried my way through Sunday services. Some of you here saw that and know that. It was very hard in those years to sing on the outside when inside our faith was being so brutally tested and we felt really abandoned and hopeless. By the time Josh, who was an emerging artist, and Zach, a budding musician, convinced us to move to a large artsy church in St. Catharines, we were actually starting to come out on the other side of that long, dark valley. Bethany Community Church, where we go now, has been a place of respite and healing for many wounded ministry veterans like us. We were content to just kind of slip in unnoticed. In a big church, you can kind of do that, and start to turn a new chapter in our lives. But it wasn't long before our boys' gifts were discovered there, and we were just happy to see them being used in ministry. There they are. That's Josh at the top. You've heard Josh speak here and bring his art. And that's Zach at the bottom. Some of you won't recognize him with his long hair and playing many different instruments and composing. Before we even understood that we wanted or needed new friends, a few families were prompted by God at that church to just kind of adopt us. Although we still felt really vulnerable, we started gradually to share with them and some of the pastors just a little bit of our pain from the past. God's strength was starting to grow in us, even amidst our weakness as our bodies were failing. Now, to most people, it seems like our family has the world by the tail. In spite of their growing symptoms and Zach's string of concussions, which don't help either, our boys have continued to thrive. They each graduated from high school 2 years early. Last year, they were discovered by an international prodigy expert, and that was what this article was about. And they were on TV. There was all sorts of media things about them. She discovered them, Josh painting at an adult professional level, and Zach creating such complex musical compositions that most of us really don't get his music. Now he's studying jazz theory at a master's level. Everybody says to us, but you don't look sick. In fact, you look great, you guys. But ours is one of those invisible illnesses. Sorry. Under the surface, the insidious Lyme bacteria is marching through our bodies like a Trojan horse. It moves from your blood to your tissues and eventually your organs, even the brain. In fact, Alzheimer's dementia is pretty much a foregone conclusion for people who have Lyme disease. And Doug has already been diagnosed by the best brain doctors in Toronto as having the precursor to dementia. Although we have, just a second, sorry. Although we have been treating for symptoms, and we really have seen some improvement over the last few years, other symptoms tend to pop up, and it really compounds over time. Kind of like the owner of Magnata Wineries, who had Lyme disease, and eventually he just had so many symptoms that one of him was the end of him, and he died. There's actually no treatment for chronic Lyme disease available in Canada, and we pretty much resigned ourselves to not being able to be treated in the US because we can't begin to afford it. This past year, though, we started being handed newspaper articles by people of others, local Lyme sufferers, who are doing fundraising to be able to be treated at the most successful clinic in the States, which is located in Florida. The stories brought tears to my eyes because I thought to myself, that's nice for them, but who's going to do a fundraiser for a whole family? But at least it prompted me to write down our story. Recently, when we were on vacation at Milton Helen's condo in Florida that they graciously offered us, I decided to finish that story and have my family look at it, and I sent it in to the best reporter at the Spectator that I knew. He promptly wrote us back and met with us as soon as we got home. He interviewed us, and he really urged us to start a fundraising campaign that would come out at the time this article came out. We woke up a couple of Fridays ago to our story on the front page of the Hamilton Spectator. Some of you might have noticed it. It feels really strange to have our story and this fundraiser go public, but it was wonderful to see in the article that there was a really clear testimony of God's strength in the midst of our family's weakness. If through that article, even one person can be drawn into God's grace, it'll be worth it, regardless of whether we ever get to be treated for Lyme disease. We posted that link to the article on Facebook on a Friday, and our pastor saw it, his secretary brought it to him, and he called us early that Friday afternoon and asked us to speak that weekend at our church about it. Doug wouldn't be able to do that because he had to go to Toronto on an overnight sleep apnea study, so I knew it would be up to me. It was the first time in over a decade that we would speak, and the first time we ever would speak about these struggles we've had health-wise. But because our pastor is like one of the most caring people in the whole world, I agreed to do it. And I'm really glad that I did. Since then, a small army of people from our church have assembled, including the Henderson's daughter, Beth, and her family. And they're all planning a huge fundraising event at the end of this month. It'll be at a farm up past Ridge Road in Grimsby, and it's a state farm, a beautiful property. And they're going to have all sorts of activities you can see on the posters and the bookmarks that they made up. This is really humbling for us, as you can imagine. We would much rather be on the giving end of something like this. But as Milt, you heard from Milt last week, the price of 4 people going to the States for treatment like this is astronomical. It's actually similar to prices here for weekly blood work and diagnostics and disease treatment. It's just that we Canadians never see those bills come in, so we're unaware of how much it actually costs. My mom Marjorie, who's sitting here at the front, I think most of you know her, she's also on the fundraising committee, so she's going to be available afterwards if you want to ask any questions. She's the one that placed these posters and bookmarks on the table. If you want to take the posters, if you have a good place you know you can post it where there's lots of traffic, lots of people, take one. You're welcome to take the bookmarks like an invitation as well. If you're interested in going to the event or writing a check for a tax-deductible receipt through our church, you can also speak to my mom. Thanks, Mom, for doing that, and thanks to Doug, who is here helping me video this speaking. The committee is very into social media, and they wanted it videoed so they could put it up on the computer and advertise this event. And thank you to all of you for listening.